Well, it's not a biography, and it's not an autobiography. So I'm not a biographer, and I don't think I'm a ghostwriter. I think that I've read a lot of political biographies over the course of my life, and some of them have been outstanding, but with a lot of them, even some of the good ones, the kind of what you might call the authenticity or the authentic voice of the subject gets leached out in the process of analysis and churning it all through. Who is he, what makes him tick? And with an autobiography, you'll get varying degrees of self-interest, of course. What you're getting is the subject discussing him or herself. So what this has turned out to be, and I wasn't quite sure what it was going to be when I started, is Keating's authentic voice, but with the checks and balances from my side. So you are very much caught up in Keating's words, but it's a narrative that's led by me. And you'll see where he's being tested, and you can judge for yourself in the end what you take as his place in history. It's certainly the longest. It's the longest continuous conversation I've ever had with anyone, and it's taken place over several years because I really first started talking to Keating about doing it in 2012, and we constructed the interview series for the ABC in 4 sections, and each of those 4 sections was an hour on air. What I've done with the book is stick to that basic structure. So part 1 covers the early part of his life, his influences, the Bother boy emerging, the guy with the extraordinary ambition, but that complexity and the sort of breadth of his curiosity, and the quirkiness of his nature as well, which takes you up to the dismissal. So his early years in Parliament. The second and the third are his years as Treasurer, and part 4, Keating Prime Minister. There were a lot of frustrations with the television series, as there always is with television, because there is a real tyranny about time. And I felt, and he felt as well, that we did not do justice to the range of issues that covered his prime ministership. So there was that first set of interviews that I did for the television series, and that was about 16 hours of recorded conversation. And then over the last 18 months, there is probably at least another 16 hours of conversation, filling in the gaps, covering new areas, for instance, the media. I think it's in the DNA of your average Labor politician to see the mainstream institutionalised media, other than the ABC, as the enemy, and the ABC not so much as the friend, but perhaps the media institution that Labor people have tended to regard as the closest thing they can find to an unbiased media or a reasonably balanced media. And Keating had that in spades. So Keating's hand, his fingers, were in the media pie every time it was up for discussion within the Labor Party for policy. He was the guy who coined the phrase the princes of print and the queens of the screen, where a proprietor could either have significant ownership in television or significant ownership in print, but not both. Now, I didn't touch that for the television series because I just knew we wouldn't have time to do it well or do it properly. But he's very revealing on that, quite candid about his dislike bordering on hatred of the Herald and Weekly Times and the kind of establishment money behind it, and what he saw as their pathological dislike of Labor and their determination whenever Labor happened to accidentally stray into office to get them out as quickly as possible. So those kinds of new elements that we've got in the book, I think, fleshes out the story of Keating much more. Well, he made the commitment first to the series, and having made the commitment, he is the kind of guy, as I suspect you'd imagine, who then takes it seriously. So I think for him it was probably love-hate, and for me with the book it was a little bit of love-hate, but nonetheless a fascinating process. And I think many journalists and many writers would have a love-hate relationship with the act of writing. But for him it meant having to freshen his memory, even though it's a pretty sharp memory, to freshen his memory on the fine detail of his political life, which covers a lot of years, 27 years in the Parliament, 13 years in government, 8 years as Treasurer, 4.5 years nearly as Prime Minister. A lot of budgets, a lot of policies, a lot of debates in the Parliament, a lot of political crises, a lot of personal relationships to distill. So you could see sometimes not just the intensity of the concentration, but the pain of reliving some of these things. Well, that's what he says, and I'm inclined to believe him at this stage. He and I are both now past 70, so I'm beginning to know how it feels. He has said that consistently, and I believe him. One of the things that I liked hearing him say, because it's a kind of slightly reassuring insight to his self-analysis. He said to me that at a certain point well into the process, he said, it's just occurred to me, he said, I've looked back at some of this stuff, and he said, I would never have thought to even raise these questions in my own mind if I was writing an autobiography. And I might add, some of the questions might have been things that he didn't like. I mean, I could sense when he was getting questions he didn't particularly enjoy addressing, but never complained. He did not complain about a single question, but a number of them would have been awkward for him. The one thing that we didn't, that I agreed is on a request from him, and it was the only thing he asked, was that we did not put heavy focus on the family, and I respected that. So there is a sense of the family side of things as we move through, his closeness to his kids, for instance, and the intrusions of public office on family life. But I did respect that. But I think that he brought an intensity of purpose to the conversations. I knew there was a great deal of effort that he'd put into his preparations. And he's got such an enormous bank of material in his personal archive, quite apart from the official cabinet documents and so on. The 10,000 newspaper stories that he has in his now digitised archive, complete in many instances with that sort of copperplate Keating handwriting in the margins, where he's made some sometimes amusing, sometimes scathing comments about the people and issues in the stories. And I might add, a lot of the stories are stories in which he is not portrayed in a good light. So it says something. I think it's a tick for him, because it was the first thing I looked for when I was given the access to the archive, to see how selective he was in what he kept and what he discarded. And you'll find some of his journalistic and other enemies in that archive.